Now that you understand layering in Photoshop, in this section, you're going to learn about selections in Photoshop. So layering is very important in Photoshop, but so is selections. It's very fundamental. When we're selecting in Photoshop, we're really selecting pixels. So there are many different selection techniques. Now you can move layers with the Move tool, and that feels like InDesign or Illustrator where you're moving objects around with the Selection tool, but it's a little bit different in Photoshop. When you're selecting things, you're actually selecting pixels. So there are many different ways to select pixels, and it really depends on what we want to select. So are we selecting a car or something that is really differentiated from the background? Then we're going to use specific tools to select the car. Or are we trying to select hair? Then it's a little bit more difficult to select just the hair compared to the background. Or are we selecting basic shapes? Or do we want to select a color range? So in this section, you'll learn how to make selections in Photoshop and why you would use various tools. And once you make a selection in Photoshop, you can then add a filter to only those selected pixels, or you can duplicate them onto a new layer by pressing Ctrl-J on the PC or Command-J on the Mac, for example. And you can move just those pixels around with a Move tool once they're selected. There are many different uses for selections, so let's get started in making selections in Photoshop. Just like layers, selections are very important aspects of Photoshop. Photographers and designers should know how to make accurate selections and know which selection tool to use in which situation. I have another course that goes really in depth with Photoshop's tools, including selection tools, but this section provides a brief overview of the primary concepts and uses of popular selection tools. Open up selections.psd from the support files. We used the rectangular marquee selection tool in an earlier lecture as a rectangle selection. For a perfect square, hold Shift while clicking and dragging the selection. This tool is useful for when we want to select rectangle or square-shaped areas of pixels. Click and hold the rectangular marquee selection tool, and select the elliptical marquee selection tool. This is useful for when selecting circular areas, including perfect circles, in which case we'd hold Shift while clicking and dragging. A quick tip, by default, the marquee selection tools start from the side, so it can be difficult to get a good selection right away. Try pressing Alt on the PC or Option on the Mac while clicking and dragging, and the selection will begin from the center. Also, we can move around the selection tool after we've created it, or while clicking and dragging a selection, hold the spacebar to move the position of the selection, and then let go of the spacebar to resize it again. Once there's a selection, we can use the Move tool to move those pixels, or add filters to the selected area, and so on. The Lasso tool can be effective for freeform selections by clicking and dragging, but the Polygonal Lasso tool is effective when an image has straight lines and areas to select. Just click and then click on areas to create the edge of a selection. The Quick Selection tool can be useful to select areas that have a definite edge. The Magic Wand tool can be effective when there's a definite edge as well. Adjust the tolerance for more accurate selections. If it's a high number, more pixels will be included. If it's a low number, fewer pixels will be included as related to the original clicking point hue. All of these tools can be used together to add or subtract from selections. Hold Shift to add to selections, and hold Alt on the PC or Option on the Mac to subtract from selections, or use the options up on the options bar to set the selection tools to add to or subtract from a current selection. Next, we'll go over modifying and saving selections. Whenever you've made a selection in a photo, you can modify the edge by going to Select, Modify, and choose from various options such as Feather, which can add a soft edge to the selection. You can also go to Select, Refine Edge, and add a feather or other selection modification there. You can also go to Select, Transform Selection. This will allow us to stretch or rotate selections. If you have an area selected and want to select everything but that area, you can go to Select, Inverse. This will select what was previously not selected. You can also save selections. Just go to Select, Save Selection, and give it a name. Later, it can be loaded as a selection by going to Select, Load Selection. So that's the basics of modifying selections. To learn more in depth about the various selection tools and their options, check out my course called Photoshop Tools in Depth. For now, let's learn about masking in the next section and then wrap up this course with 3 follow-along tutorials which will put some of what you've learned into practice.